Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today we're going to talk about a highly acclaimed and legendary Hollywood film director who may not be a household name today, but many of his movies certainly are. He directed Wings, the first movie to win a Best Picture Academy Award. In his 35-year career, he directed 76 movies, including the original A Star is Born, Beau Geste, Public Enemy, Call of the Wild, The High and the Mighty, The Story of G.I. Joe, Battleground, Buffalo Bill, and so many others. He was, of course, William Wellman. His films received 32 Academy Award nominations and 7 Oscars. His son is William Wellman Jr., an accomplished actor in his own right, who's written a wonderful book entitled Wild Bill Wellman, Hollywood Rebel. He also produced a documentary entitled Wild Bill, Hollywood Maverick. I'm delighted to welcome William Wellman Jr. to our show. Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Harvey.
Bill, many people may not be aware that your father was a war hero. He was a fighter pilot with the French Foreign Legion in World War I and was seriously wounded when he was shot down by the Germans. He had enormous respect for pilots and made 11 films about aviation, didn't he?
Oh, he loved, once he came back from the war, now he had 6 major air crashes and he was kind of beat up. But when he recovered, he never lost his love of flying. And pilots were always number one. I mean, he directed some of the greatest stars, Clark Gable and Gregory Peck and on, but flyers were the most important men to him.
Can you tell us the story about General Pershing and how your father became a director? I just love that story, Bill.
Well, he was at the Goldwyn Studios, and General Pershing came to see the studio. He came to be, an important player there, come to the studio. He was well received, and the studio had all of their contract players, actors, the directors, the assistant directors, everybody lined up in a line so that Pershing could just start at the beginning and go down the line. But it was kind of funny because as he looked down the line and the actresses, the stars were at the other end of the line, so he started to quicken his steps to get down to them. But when he got to my father, he stopped and he said, "Don't I know you?" And my father said, "Yes, sir, but I think you might not want me to tell you now." And he said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, it was in and he kind of whispered to him, it was in a brothel in Paris. And the story is that my father was trying to find somebody special in this brothel. And when he came in the door, everyone was talking about Pershing being upstairs in one of the rooms with one of the women. And my father wanted to talk to him because my father wanted to get into the American Army. He wanted to get out of the French service and into the American service. So my father snuck upstairs and found the bedroom and opened the door and went in. And on the floor, he crawled onto the floor, and Pershing got up and found my father there. He didn't know what he was going to do, hit him or what. My father said, "General, I just wanted to tell you that I'm here. I want to be in the American Army, and I figured you could help me." And Pershing was just absolutely amazed, and he helped my father. He actually helped him get into the U.S. Army at that time. And then Pershing said to my father, "What can I do to help you?" And my father said, "Make me a director." And Pershing went to the head of the studio and told him good things about my father. And my father became an assistant director. Before that, he was just, a messenger boy. And so Pershing helped my father on the road to being a director.
It's a story that's well worth the price of the book, I gotta tell you. It's very amusing. Your father's fighting instinct that he had as a pilot was really prevalent in the way he dealt with studio executives, to the point that there was actually a physical confrontation at Fox when he asked for a raise, and then he got blackballed for a while, didn't he?
Yes, he did. My father got the nickname during the war of Wild Bill. And when he came to Hollywood, he kept the name. And he did get in fights, and he did slap and actually spit on the head of the studio. And that's why, because my father was furious with him. That was one of his problems, but he also got in fights with studio executives, oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 more times throughout his days as a director.
Wasn't he even fired from MGM at one point?
He was discharged.
What was it about the studio system that he just didn't like?
He had trouble with authority. My father grew up, in a suburb of Boston, and he was always fighting. He lived in a neighborhood where there were lots of ethnic groups in different neighborhoods, and he had to go through them all to get to school. And my father was Irish, and a lot of the groups didn't like the Irish. So my father was fighting all the way through high school. That was just something that he did. It was just a sort of a normal procedure where you have to fight for what you want.
But a lot of his beefs about the studio system were very valid. For example, he didn't appreciate that he had little or no control over the assignments he was given and no control over the final cut of the movie.
That's true. It started out that way. He was under contract at a couple of studios, but we'll go to Warner Brothers, where he went in the 1930s, and he was just a contract player. He didn't have control over the projects. He had to do the projects that they gave him. And he got tired. At Warner Brothers, they were doing these projects about women in trouble. That was a big thing. And one picture after another was women in trouble. They could be all different kinds of women, but they were in trouble with the law, with gangsters, whatever it was. And my father, squawked to the studio. He said, I want something else. I'm sick and tired of these women in trouble. So what they did is they loaned him out to another studio. And he went over to another studio, and the first picture he got over there was a woman in trouble. So eventually, though, he started making films like Public Enemy, because there was always a few films that he held on to that he came in contact with, and he put up to the studio, said, this is what I want to do, not Woman in Trouble. And eventually he got to do some of those, and they became very successful. And then he reached a point now where he could make his own choices.
Bill, you wrote that your father's Maverick style kept him from being included in the elite social circles in Hollywood. It seems clear that his reputation as a maverick and an outlaw worked against him when it came to getting awards for his work. I mean, he wasn't even invited to the 1929 Oscars when Wings won Best Picture.
Well, that's exactly true. The studios looked at him as a rebel, because he would try to close his sets and not have executives come down to the sets and start making decisions, directorial decisions. It bothered him a lot. So he tried to keep them away. And they didn't like that, because at the studios in those days, they wanted to be able to control their directors. And my father did not want to be controlled. He wanted to make the pictures his way. And that caused a lot of problems.
William Wellman was nominated 3 times for Best Director, but his only Oscar came for writing the original A Star is Born, not for directing. What films do you think he should have won Oscars for?
Well, I think Wings. Let's start with the picture that won the Oscar for Best Picture. He didn't even get nominated for that one. I think Public Enemy. I think Story of G.I. Joe, Battleground, which he did get nominated for, The High and the Mighty. He got nominated, but he didn't win. Beau Geste, fantastic film. So many films that he could have gotten nominated for. But again, like you said, he was a rebel. And the people who are in charge of Oscars and that sort of thing, they would rather keep the rebel out.
I'm sure you would agree with me that it's extremely rare at the Academy Awards for a movie nominated for Best Picture not to be also nominated for Best Director. But that's exactly what they did to your father in Wings.
Yes. He wasn't even invited to come to the presentation. It's always interesting to me, and I wrote about it in my book, that he was so angry about it, but he just went back to his apartment, his room, and he got drunk and he played out the Academy Awards by himself. But it was unbelievable that that picture, first of all, that picture was such an incredible picture. That picture was in release for over 2.5 years in first run. The picture was just fantastic, and it was all him, you
Well,
know.
you wrote a book about the making of Wings. Your father introduced some very innovative filmmaking techniques to make the aviation scene so realistic. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Everything was new, and the planes, they had over 100 planes in Wings, and 200 pilots that they got, Air Force pilots. And the idea to send up a plane, first of all, cameras had not been in planes. Even air shows of the time, cameras were on the ground. They had to get cameras in the planes, and the planes were two-seaters. So you'd have the pilot in one seat and the cameraman in the second seat to do the filming. My father and his cameraman, they bolted cameras to the fuselages of the planes so they could get a shot, from the plane to the pilot. And they made all this was all brand new. Nobody had done this before. Now, he also put up these huge towers, and they had cameras in different levels of the towers to shoot the planes and the war stuff that was going on below. So it's amazing the camera footage that they got of planes from various things, from in the plane, from outside the plane, from towers, and out of it came the most incredible air scenes that anyone had ever seen.
It's a remarkable movie, and if anyone hasn't seen Wings, it's absolutely worth seeing. Now, Bill, I want to ask you about A Star is Born, the original 1937 movie, which your father wrote and directed, starred Janet Gaynor and Frederick March. The film was remade in 1954 with Judy Garland and James Mason, and then it was remade in 1976 with Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson, and most recently it was remade in 2018 with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. What is it about that film that makes people keep wanting to remake it?
It's such a dramatic film when anyone who cares about movies, and the idea that you have these people. See, my father wrote the original story based on people he knew. John Barrymore, John Gilbert. There was a John Bowers who was a silent screen star. These are people who lost their careers because of alcoholism, and since my father knew the models for his film, that it was so amazing to see one star rises while one falls, and it brings in all of the craziness of Hollywood, to use that term. You just get to see it all right in front of you there. And it was so successful. The original Star is Born was so successful that they had to continue doing it. And each time they did it, it was successful. And the most recent one with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper, again, was hugely successful. And they'll be doing another one. Believe me, they'll do another one. The rise and fall of movie stars. When they did the first remake, they offered the directorship to my father. He turned it down. He told Warner Brothers, he says, "This is ridiculous to make my story into a musical." And I have to tell you this, my father did not like remakes. See, my father used to say, you ought to be able to come up with a different story, or at least a different point of view. He didn't like the idea of that. And I remember when I wrote an article about Howard Hawks, and he made many great pictures. And when I was down in Palm Springs, where he was living, Palm Springs, California, and I asked him about that, and he loved remakes. He says, "Bill, if it was good once, it can be good again." But you see, my father was so much stepping forward, not the past, almost not the present. He wanted to move forward and do something that hadn't been done. So he didn't like the idea of his Star is Born being made into a musical. He didn't like it.
Do you think he ever saw the one with Judy Garland?
Well, yes, he saw it. I hate to say this because he thought that James Mason was totally wrong for the role. And actually, I think so too. I couldn't see him as a Frederick March. And James Mason was a fine actor, don't get me wrong. But it just didn't seem, it was a Judy Garland television special to me. It was so different from my father's view, where actually the Barbra Streisand version got back a little more like my father's, and Bradley Cooper's version was very much like my father's version.
Well, even if he didn't like remakes, I think it's a real tribute to him as a storyteller that he could tell this story in such a way that it's just timeless.
Yeah, it's just, it'll be made again, believe me. And he had to fight pretty hard to get it made in the first place. Nobody wanted to make it, and he went to David Selznick, who helped get started in the business. When my father was at Paramount, he hired David Selznick to be a producer when the studio didn't want him. But anyway, when my father went to Selznick with his story, which was called It Happened in Hollywood, was the original title. And Selznick didn't want to do it because he had done a Hollywood picture called What Price Hollywood, which was different. It was about a director. It was a different story. And Selznick didn't want to do another Hollywood picture so soon after. And my father tried to talk him into it.
Now, there are rumors that your father worked on Gone with the Wind. Do you know if it's true?
Oh, it is true. It's not a rumor. You know, this was something that I got into a little bit too, because when writers started writing stories that my father had nothing to do with Gone with the Wind, and it made me angry because to go back at the beginning in I think it was 1954, 53 or 54, I went with my father to David Selznick's house because Selznick and my father became close friends. And at this time, Selznick was living in Beverly Hills, and I went with my father, and Selznick had a number of guests. And when he started talking about my father, he said, now I'm going to name all the things that I did with Bill Wellman. And in that list, he didn't say Gone with the Wind. And I'm sitting there, and my father said, well, David, don't forget about Gone with the Wind. And Selznick said, and that too. You know, he admitted that my father did the first burning of Atlanta sequence. Selznick hired him and wanted him to do that. And he did it. And so I know I listened to David Selznick tell my father, and that one too, you know, and I know my father did it. He said he did it. He worked for, you know, a week or two on the film, on the burning of Atlanta sequence.
Well, now everyone watching this interview will know for sure that it really is true.
Yes.
I want to ask you about Men with Wings, which is widely considered to be a classic film about aviation. Your father had script approval, but the military intervened and basically changed the ending, didn't they?
Yes, they had certain things that they needed to do about it, and you know, it angered my father, but he, you know, he didn't have much choice in it, but he shot some fabulous footage of World War I planes that were used by other companies. In fact, my father used it again in his movie, which became the Lafayette Escadrille. The dogfight in that movie is from Men with Wings.
Wow. The story of G.I. Joe is generally considered to be your father's masterpiece. Do you agree?
I kind of tie it with Battleground. I'll tell you why. Battleground to me was such a beautifully told story and very realistic, as was G.I. Joe. But as a kid, you know, I preferred Battleground. And when I said to my father, Dad, I like Battleground better, he said, well, I like Battleground too, but it's a studio story. He said, G.I. Joe is the real thing.
So is Battleground your favorite film of your father's?
No, I can't say it's my favorite because I can't really pick one. See, I loved the original Star is Born. I love Westward the Women. It's my favorite Western of my father's.
What was his favorite movie of all the ones he made?
His favorite movie was G.I. Joe, just a touch better than the Oxbow incident. Those were his two favorites. And then A Star is Born.
I want to ask you about your father's attitude towards actors. In a 1952 interview, your dad said, and I'm quoting here, movie stardom isn't about acting ability, it's about personality and temperament. Now, you've been in 180 movies and TV shows. Do you agree with him?
He just believed he wanted it real. That's why when he would shoot, he most often would shoot and take the first take because he felt that was more real. As an actor, you begin, if you keep doing takes, you begin bringing up other things. It's not exactly as fresh as that first take is. Although sometimes actors believe that they can build on it. So there's a lot of ways of looking at it, but my father really liked the first take. He thought he tried to set the stage for the actor to be relaxed and in a position to do it the way it was, the way it should be, the most authentic way.
Well, we have to mention here that your father was able to get Oscar nominated performances 7 times from 7 actors: Frederick March and Janet Gaynor in Star is Born, Brian Donlevy for Beau Geste,
Mhm.
Robert Mitchum for The Story of G.I. Joe, James Whitmore for Battleground, and Jan Sterling and Claire Trevor for The High and the Mighty. That is really impressive, Bill.
With great directors like William Wilder and Billy Wilder, they did many takes, 10, 20, 30 takes, and it wears actors out. An actor has to get through that and keep trying to be fresh. And my father just saw that if you rehearse it, and if there were no problems in the rehearsal, shoot it and move on. And I think that's why he got so many terrific performances. And actors really appreciate that, most of them. The New York style actor that came in late in my father's career wanted to be able to continue to do the scene over and over and over again. And if they were talented enough, they could make it better. But my father didn't see it that way.
Tell us about his final film, which was to be called C'est la guerre and
Mhm.
was a tribute to the young pilots of World War I. It ended up being called Lafayette Escadrille after Jack Warner basically butchered the movie, and that really broke your father's heart, didn't it?
It did. He had wanted to make that film, gosh, back in the 30s. He started trying to get somebody to make that film. He tried it at MGM, he tried it at 20th Century Fox, he tried it at different places, and no one wanted to do it. And finally, at Warner Brothers, because of The High and the Mighty, you see, The High and the Mighty being such a success that Jack Warner wanted my father to stay at the studio. And so my father was able to talk him into letting him do C'est la guerre. But my father didn't realize that Jack Warner and the studio executives were looking at this project in an entirely different way than my father. See, my father wanted to hearken back to the First World War, to the pilots that he knew. Friends of his were killed in that war. And my father wanted to do it the way it was. See, but Warner decided to let him do it because they wanted him at the studio, but they looked at it as a film to use their contract players and to make it a kind of a story for kids. And, they wanted to make it all together. And they got Tab Hunter into the lead when my father wanted James Dean. And it just became something else. And even after it was shot, then the studio tried to redo it, and they took some of the flying out of it and they changed it, and it was so depressing to my father that it wasn't the picture that he wanted to make.
And he retired from the movie industry after that experience.
When that was over, he just decided, I've had enough. I quit. He used to say, I quit. He never made another picture. And it was such a sad thing. I hated to see it because at this time I'm an actor, I'm working in the business, and I felt like he should be back working at the business.
Now, Bill, you were actually in Lafayette Escadrille, weren't you?
This was my first film. Yeah. It was quite a shock for me because I was a freshman at Duke University, and I always loved sports, and I considered that I was going to be a professional baseball player. That's what was in my mind. And I had a tryout with the Giants, so I wasn't a bad player either. But when I came back after my first year at Duke, and my father was now preparing the Lafayette Escadrille, and the studio, again, here's the studio trying to change things. They were all for me playing my father in the movie. I was the right age, but they wanted Andy Devine's son and Joel McRae's son. See, they were trying to trick it, but my father liked the idea of me playing him in the movie. And he calls me one day from the studio. I'm home, and he tells me that he thinks that he wants me to come out and test to play him, which was a major role in the movie. And I didn't say a thing on the phone. And I remember he said, "Did you hear me?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you don't sound very excited." I said, "Geez, I don't know what to say. And I went out and tested for it. And the thing that was even more ridiculous, now I got the scenes, so I learned them. But what did I know about acting? Nothing. And I remember my father came home that evening, and he said, "Bill, you got the job." And he said, "Now, I just want you to know, I just want you to be yourself. When you go out there and you do the test, be yourself." So I start shooting, and I'm just trying to be myself. In fact, if you see the movie, there's no acting going on with me. I'm just myself. Well, it worked. I mean, the studio wanted to put me under contract, and I've had a whole career, of over 200 movies and television shows. So I've tried to be a better actor than I was at that time.
And you're not just an actor, you produced a documentary about your father entitled Wild Bill Hollywood Maverick, which was directed by Todd Robinson, who appeared on our show. I've had the pleasure of seeing it, and I found it to be a real education in the golden age of Hollywood. What inspired you to make the documentary?
Going back to the way my father quit the industry, it always bothered me that I never thought he got the recognition that he deserved. And I was always trying to do something about it. I even tried to make Columbia do a story of his life. So I spent 25 years working on a story of my father's life. And I finally got it done by going to John Wayne's son, Michael Wayne, who was the head of Batjac, which was John Wayne's company, and Mike Wayne was the president of it. I'd gotten all of the stars that my father had worked with, as many as I could, and I hired Todd, who I had met, and I really appreciated his work. He was really a terrific director, and we made it, and it was a 94-minute documentary, and we won awards all over the world.
It is a fabulous documentary. Todd is a wonderful director. I
Yes.
encourage everybody to watch my interview with him. He was really terrific. And I just think it's not just about your dad, it really is an education about the golden age of Hollywood.
When we started shooting and all, and my father said to me, "Bill, what the hell are you doing this for?" I said, "Dad, I just think it's important. I think people need to know more about your work." And he says, "Well, I don't care about it. So who else is going to care about it?" And I said, "Well, I think there are people who will care about it." And he was amazed the whole time. And when we had a screening, the first screening at a public theater, And I got him to come to it, and he was just amazed. And he went up on stage, and it was absolutely incredible. I mean, the theater was packed, and he couldn't believe that how much people loved it. And all of a sudden, it sort of rejuvenated my father. All of a sudden, he was being asked to go on television talk shows, and he went on the Merv Griffin show.
Bill, you grew up around so many legendary Hollywood stars like Gary Cooper, Tyrone Power, Henry Fonda, Carole Lombard, Frank Capra, Lana Turner. Your first girlfriend was Jane Fonda, and you made a whole lot of movies. Why haven't you written your memoirs?
Well, I've written two books, but those books are about my father. My next book is going to be about my career, but from the point of view of the people that I knew, the people that I worked with. I mean, alphabetically, we've got Marlon Brando to John Wayne and everybody in between that I worked with and that I knew. I mean, our neighborhood, just think of this, growing up in a neighborhood like this. These were the people within 2 streets to the east, 2 streets to the west, and 7 blocks north of Sunset Boulevard. That area of Brentwood, there was the Fonda family, Tyrone Power, Gary Cooper, Van Johnson, Cesar Romero, the Andrews sisters. There was Gene Fowler, the great writer. There was Nelson Eddy. There was Frank Capra. There was Red Skelton. There was Bob Crosby, Bing Crosby's brother. There was Xavier Cugat. There was Richard Dix, Irene Dunn, there was Lana Turner, and there was my favorite, Hopalong Cassidy. These people were in my neighborhood. If I walked around the neighborhood as I did, I would run into these people. And I grew up with some of their kids. So, I mean, it was just like, I thought these people were in everybody's neighborhood. I didn't realize till I was about 13 that these people aren't in everybody's neighborhood.
And your father was friends with Joel McCrea, and you knew Wyatt McCrea, who was also a guest on our show.
Wyatt McCrea is a good friend of mine, a wonderful guy. After Buffalo Bill, my father and Joel McCrea became very close friends. And the McCraes used to come out to our house because, you know, we had a kind of a ranch, a kind of a farm ranch. And of course, Joel McCrea had a great ranch. And we would go out there and ride horses with Joel McCrea. So, you know, we were very close friends.
I want to ask you about your film career, Bill. You were in The Happiest Millionaire with my friend Leslie Ann Warren, who also appeared on our show. It's one of my favorite movies. Could you tell us a little bit about working on that film?
Well, it's one of the 56 movies that I worked in. It's one of my very favorites. It's a film that I can't even believe I got into it, but what happened was they hired Johnny Indrisano to be the fight technical advisor for the fights in the movie. And Johnny Indrisano was one of the great fight technical advisors and all of the great fight movies that you can think of. Somebody Up There Likes Me, The Harder They Fall, On, Body and Soul. He did all the fights in all those movies. And my father had Johnny Indrisano teach us how to fight. He wanted us to learn how to fight. So anyway, Johnny Indrisano is working on The Happiest Millionaire preparing the fight stuff. And he thought I was one of the best fighters of all Hollywood actors. So he went to Walt Disney and said, you know, you ought to hire Bill Wellman Jr. to be one of the Marines in this movie. So that's how I got the audition. And I went and auditioned for the role, and Walt Disney picked me. But now here I get to be in this movie. It's a musical. Now I don't sing or dance, okay? So I'm the boxing champion of the Marines in this movie. But to be able to go on the set to go to Walt Disney Studios and Walt Disney would come on the set every day. He loved that film. He bought that property. It was a New York play. He brought that property to his studio, and he just loved it. And he cast that picture, and he loved that picture every day he came on the set. And and the chance to there is Fred MacMurray. I'm working with Fred MacMurray now. His co-star Greer Garson was somebody that I just fell in love with her. She was so wonderful. I couldn't take my eyes off her on the set. She never made an ungraceful move. She was just, nothing ruffled her feathers. Now, it was kind of interesting because my father he only made one picture with Fred MacMurray. And one time I said to him, Dad, Fred MacMurray is a friend of the family's, and you only made one movie. How come you didn't use him again? I couldn't stand it. He can't remember his lines. He can't remember any. I couldn't stand all the retakes I had to do. And I thought, well, my dad, even though he would tell the truth, he would exaggerate. So I thought he's exaggerating. Well, the first scene I have in The Happiest Millionaire is when Fred MacMurray introduces the Marines. There's 3 of us that come in, and there's a whole living room full of actors and actresses, in this big scene of our introduction. And Fred MacMurray is blowing lines all over the place. They're having to redo it and do it over and over and over. And I'm thinking to myself, and Fred MacMurray, and sweat is pouring down his face. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is horrible. And somehow out of this, when they finally get it, comes this beautiful sense of authenticity from Fred MacMurray. But he would blow a scene. I remember the first scene he had with Greer Garson, just the 2 of them. And they're sitting in this booth, and Fred is explaining something to her, and he's blowing lines all over the place. And he would stop and go, oh my God, I'm sorry, Greer. And she would say, it's all right, Fred. Just relax. You'll get it the next take. You could not ruffle this woman. She was perfect the whole time. And Fred and I really could not understand all the years of being an actor and doing great work and a wonderful person, a real great guy. And he couldn't remember lines. And I thought, what the heck? When he did My 3 Sons, he must have had cue cards and everything to help him. He couldn't remember lines. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing, because when you watch the movie, you can't tell.
No, he's wonderful. All you see is just somebody who they just thought of it. They just thought of it and said it.
I have to ask you, Bill, you played Charlie Evans in the 2008 Star Trek miniseries of Gods and Men. I know all of our Star Trek fans want to hear what that experience was like.
That was very special too, because to be in something so unusual as Star Trek, and I was just amazed when I got the role. I mean, I auditioned for it like actors do, and I got the role, and I thought, oh my God, this is great. But I'm talking the series I did before I did the Charlie Evans. See, the series, the Star Trek series I did. I loved doing that. So when they were doing the feature, they came to me, they saw me on the episode. I was only on one episode, and they cast me in the feature. And I thought, I was just amazed. I thought, this is fantastic. And I just loved working on it. It was very difficult to do it, but it was one of my very favorite roles. And I continued on to do Star Trek in Vegas, do all those shows because of that feature and the one episode of the television, the original series that I did. I enjoyed it, and I'm so happy to be a part of Star Trek. And it was a favorite show of mine.
Yeah, it's a very memorable role, and I loved you in it. So, Bill, looking back at your father's body of work and career, do you think he received the level of recognition and respect from his film historians and from the Hollywood establishment that he deserved?
Well, he didn't for a long time, but it all improved after he was gone. It's amazing. Everyone started to relive, like Turner Classic Movies. people started watching those films, and my father's films crop up all the time. And little by little, and certain people were they shepherded the idea that my father was one of the great filmmakers. And that was terrific. And people like, well, Frank Thompson, who's still one of the great historians of movies. And he's written books about my father.
You know, it's sad that it happened after he died. There's an old expression, you can't really measure a tree until it's down. It's kind of what happened. After he died, people really took a look at his body of work and saw that he created some of the most beloved classic films in the history of cinema.
Well, you know, by doing my documentary, we won an award and went to Washington, D.C., and we played there, and they gave a special award to my father. And then he did the Sundance Film Festival. Robert Redford gave a tribute to my father and played like 12 of his films and played the documentary there. So all of those things got it going. And then people started saying, did Wellman do that film and that film? Because my father made war films, Westerns, comedies, kid pictures, gangster movies. You can't name a genre that he didn't involve himself in.
Well, Bill, it's been an absolute joy to have you on our show. Thank you so much for sharing your memories and stories of your father's amazing career. He was a true Hollywood icon, and it's an honor to pay tribute to him on our show. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. I love being on your show, and you know, I'm a fan of yours. You know,
Oh,
I've
Bill,
watched.
thank you.
Yeah, no, I watched not only Wyatt McCrae's, when I heard he was on, but I watched some of the other ones. They're all great, and you have a whole litany of terrific people, of celebrities. My
Well,
good.
you're one of them. I'm hugely honored that you're here. I'm thrilled that you're going to write a book about your film career, and I hope you will come back when that book comes out.
It would be my pleasure.
Thank you so much. Our guest has been William Wellman Jr. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneinterviews.com.